All right, so let's start with list comprehension with the for loop. So the basic idea is that the for loop will allow us to generate a list by applying an operation to each element of an iterable. So it's kind of a shorthand way of creating a list. Okay, so here is how it works. We have a expression, so we want to perform some action for each item in an iterable. So the iterable can be a list, a set, can be a range, can be pretty much anything we want. So we enclose that in square brackets, and that expression will return us a list that we can capture in a new variable. So it's quite simple. You can see it's quite elegant. We already know the structure for the for loop. This just simply adds an expression for each element in an iterable that returns a list. So easy enough. Let's take an example. So here we have a list numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what we want is a list of squares for that numbers list. So what we can do is we have a list comprehension, so the square bracket here. We have number times number for number in numbers. Okay, so we take each element of the list number, we square it, and we return it into a list. So if we print that, we're going to get 1, 4, 9, 16, and 25, which is a list of squares of the original list. So of course, we're going to try that out in our code just to make sure that everything works fine. So numbers equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and we have squares, and that's going to be num multiplied by num, so squared, for num in numbers. Okay, so quite easy, quite intuitive once we already know what the for loop is. So once we have that, we can print the squares list, and that should give us the required output. There we go. 1, 4, 9, 16, and 25. So that is a list comprehension with a for loop. We have the for loop here. We have the expression that we want to apply for each element in the iterable. In our case, the iterable is a list. There we go. So let's take another example. So for instance, a list comprehension for loop with a range. Okay, we said that anything that is an iterable works as well. So here, this time we are squaring every number in a range of 6. Okay, or we can do a range that is larger, but that is enough for now. So squares is going to be num multiplied by num for num in range of whatever you want to put here. Let me put 10. So if we print the squares this time, we're going to get, there we go, we're going to get the squares of numbers 0 until 9. Remember, for the range, the number here is not included. There we go. So that is the example. So the basic idea is that it's very efficient, concise, very easy to read and understand, right? We can, of course, do this with a for loop by saving some variables, by manipulating the for loop in a certain way. But this list comprehension allows us to put everything in one line, make it very elegant, and make it really nice to read for an outside developer that comes in. Right, so let's take a couple of examples just to practice our list comprehension. So first of all, we have a tax, we have some prices, and we want to apply that tax to those prices and see what amount of tax we have. Right, this shouldn't be final prices, this should be tax, okay? Now, we have our tax 012, let's put that in code, tax 012. And we have prices is a list of $12.99, $6.99, $12.99, $6.99, and 23 and 15. The numbers here don't really matter that much, 23 and 15. Now, the tax amount, let's say, is going to be tax multiplied by price for price in prices. Okay, so we're looping through prices, we're getting the variable, and we're multiplying it by tax. So if we print the tax amount, we will get the output here. Okay, this is the amount of tax that we need to apply to the price. So if we want to say final prices, we can say tax multiplied by price plus price. Okay, so that should give us final prices here. All right, so let's go ahead and add that. And there we go, the final prices that include tax. All right, another example. Let's say we want to have the true value for odd numbers and false for even numbers. Okay, so the way we do that is we have the bool function item mod2 for each item in a set here. Okay, so let's try that in our code. So bools is going to be a list comprehension bool of number %2 for number in, and we have a set, and we can put some random numbers here. Okay, and if we print the bools variable, we will get a list of true and false values. So odds are false and evens are going to be true. Okay, because the bool function will return us true or false based on the numbers that we get. Okay, so either we get a 1 or a 0 here when we have mod2, and that will be converted into a true or false. All right, and the final example is, let's say we have a list of friend names, and we want to have that list with uppercase letters. Okay, so we have Alex, Ava, Sandra, and John as friends. Alex, Ava, Sandra, and John. And then we want to have our names with uppercase letters. So we have names equals name dot upper for name in friends. Okay, and if we print the names, all right, so we should get the capitalized versions of those names that we put in. So we can see how easy it is with list comprehension with for loops. It is very easy to convert one iterable into a list by applying some sort of operation to it. Right, so another way to do list comprehension is with the if statement. And the structure is very similar to the for loop. Okay, we can add if conditionals to list comprehension. So here we have our new list that is an expression for item in iterable. So we already know this. If condition, so we can add on top of the for loop, we can add an if condition. Okay, so we do everything. We do the expression for every item in an iterable if a condition is true. So here is an example. We are producing a list of squares for numbers that are even. Okay, so out of the list that we have here, we are only selecting the even numbers and we are producing a list of the squares. Okay, so easy enough. Let's go ahead and put that in our code. So numbers equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Of course, we could use a range for that, but that is what we're using here. So we're going to say squares equals num multiplied by num for num in numbers if, and here comes the condition, num %2 equals 0. So if the number is even, then we put it in our squares list, otherwise we don't. So then we can print our squares. There we go. So we have 4, 16, and 36. So only 2, 4, and 6 were used. The others weren't. So basically, putting an if here is kind of like putting a filter. We only we only use the elements which fulfill this condition, and the others are simply ignored. Okay, so that is the if conditional. Here is another example. So we have a list of numbers, And what we want to do is filter those numbers based on the condition that they are greater than 50. Okay, so the filtered are simply going to be 78, 98, and 51 because those are the only ones that are greater than 50. So let's try that in our code. Numbers is going to be a list of 23, 67, 34, 98, 86, and 23. Okay, now filtered is going to be num for num in numbers if num greater than 50. Okay, so we're filtering only these numbers. There we go. So now we have our new list. So we're going to print our filtered list. So if we run that, we only get the numbers that are greater than 50. So that is the basic idea behind if statements inside the list comprehension. We are able to put up a filter based on a logical expression for the elements in a collection, or an iterable rather. So far, we've seen list comprehension with for loops and with if statements. But what if our if statement contains an else block? Well, in that case, we can use that if-else statement in a list comprehension as well, except that the structure of the list comprehension changes a little bit, right? So if we have an else block, then the if structure with the else block moves to the beginning of the list comprehension. So this is now the new structure. We have expression 1 if some condition, else expression 2, for item in iterable, right? So before we had expression for item in iterable if filter or if condition. Now we have our complete if block at the beginning. So expression if condition else expression for item in iterable. Okay, so it just reverses the order. And the reason for that is that it's kind of more intuitive in that way, right? So we already know the shorthand if statement. It has this structure, right? So we cannot put one condition here, then the for loop, then the if, and the second expression at the end. It kind of doesn't make sense. So everything was moved to the beginning, and we have the for loop at the end. Okay, now in my opinion, they could have done a better job for the if statement without an else block. They could have put that at the beginning, but it is what it is, and we have this structure right now. So here is an example. What we have here is a range, the numbers 0 to 10. Okay, and what we want to do is if the numbers are odd, okay, we are multiplying them by 2. If they are even, we are dividing them by 2. Okay, so that is the structure. We are simply performing two different operations based on the number that we have. So you can see here that we have 0 is basically an even number, but we're dividing by 2, so that is still 0. Then 1 is doubled, 2 is halved, 3 is doubled, 4 is halved, 5 is doubled, and so on and so forth, right? So it depends on whether the number is odd or even. We perform either num multiplied by 2 or num divided by 2. So let's try that out in our code. So we have new numbers equals, and we have here num multiplied by 2 if num %2 is not equal to 0, else num divided by 2 for num in range of, let's say, 11. Okay, so we can see that the structure is now complete. The errors are gone. So we are doing num times 2 for odd numbers and num divided by 2 for even numbers in the range 0 to 11. So if we print our new numbers, then we should get what we were expecting, right? So either divided by 2 or multiplied by 2 in an alternate way. There we go. So that is the new structure of our if-else block for list comprehension.